Welcome to the Dahlem Realty Podcast, where we bring you behind-the-scenes stories, expert insights, and conversations with some of the most fascinating people shaping industries and business today. I'm your host, Teague Ridge, and today we have a truly special guest joining us. He's a legend in the bourbon industry, a visionary leader, and the man behind one of Kentucky's most iconic brands. Please welcome Bill Samuels Jr., Chairman Emeritus of Maker's Mark. So, Mr. Samuels, let's start with this. So, growing up on Distillers Row and being the son of the Maker's Mark's founder, what was it like being immersed in the bourbon world from such a young age?
Well, it really wasn't the bourbon world. It was the bourbon personalities that were living there. And of course, this was long before Maker's Mark ever dawned on my father. But we were this one block area of Bardstown, had a number of distillers living there. John Shawnee that owned Early Times and the McKennas. And of course, my favorite was my godfather, Jim Beam. He was next door, and he had the bigger than life personality, and I was the only kid on the block, and he loved kids, and so I got to babysit him for 7.5 years until he passed away. It was the beginning because Colonel was advised me at a very early age when I was trying to tell him how much I wanted to be an architect, and he said, "Son, forget it." He said, "Everybody in your family that's ever tried to do anything except make and sell whiskey screwed it up." And then he proceeded to go down the many business failures that my grandfather had during Prohibition.
Okay.
When he couldn't do the one thing he knew how to do. And he opened a bank in October of 1929, which was not very good.
Timing.
He had the first car dealership in Bardstown and actually had first dibs on Ford and passed it up for Franklin.
Okay.
Which lasted a couple of years. And there were others. And so he was giving me good advice. And then my dad took me in when I was a senior in high school, realizing that I wasn't near creative enough to be an architect. And I went through an elaborate testing mechanism at the Jewish Vocational Center. And I remember Dr. Dodson, he comes out and he said, "Son, you have scored lower on the creative test than anybody we've ever tested," and it was like thousands.
Okay.
That's hard to believe.
So he said, "How about you just thinking about engineering, where you don't have to be creative?" So I made a U-turn and went off to engineering school.
Tell us about what you did after engineering school. You had a career. You were a rocket scientist, weren't you?
I stumbled into something really unique that I didn't really know it was at the time. But Dwight Eisenhower was president, and he had determined that we were going to get all these aerospace companies that were located in the branches of our military assembled into one organization. And he picked the president of Case Institute of Technology, where I went to school, as the guy that would create NASA. And so we had one session with the president of Case. He did not resign. He just took a leave of absence, and he told us all. He said, "The good news is, if I'm still at NASA, any of y'all want a job or a fellowship at one of the universities that's deep into NASA projects, write me a letter. The bad news is only a third of you are going to graduate." And so for the next 4 years, it was really tough being one of the third. And so the last week of school, I wrote him a letter, and he got me hooked up with a NASA project, Polaris, which is the submarine.
Yeah.
And 4 of us graduates. They also got us in graduate school at Berkeley, which was a rough time to be at Berkeley. The Vietnam War was going on. Berkeley decided the kids decided they'd rather tear the school down than do anything constructive. And 4 of us were assigned the project of designing the first non-graphite rocket nozzle, and it was to be used in the Polaris A2.
Wow.
Too heavy, too expensive, didn't work. Got fired.
Okay.
That wasn't the language they used, but they said project will not get refunded.
So that was the end of the rocket career.
That was the end of the rocket career. Well, we had an incident which really caused the termination to be so quick. We managed to blow up the test site.
Well, that'll do it.
Accidentally.
That'll do it.
And I won't admit that it was me, but it was one of the four of us, and we all got terminated.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Well, yeah, when you blow up the test facility, that okay. All right. So you mentioned Jim Beam. Can you share how he influenced your perspective on bourbon and business?
Well, it wasn't bourbon so much because I didn't care about bourbon. Hell, I was,
because you were young at that age,
I was
right?
a little kid, but I was impressionable because he was such a huge personality, and he was my grandfather's best friend.
Okay.
And Granddad had a crazy side also, and so they really got along great. And he liked to screw with my granddad, and one of the ways he would do it when I was over there playing with his Lincoln Logs before dinner every day. That was my babysitting assignment. Or it was his. And so he would tell me, he would expand on those stories of our business failures. But he would only do it one each time in great detail. Mm-hmm. So I would go home and announce what I had just learned from Colonel Beam, and it would screw up dinner.
I'm sure.
And there was a lot of these. And many years later, I ended up doing the advertising for Maker's Mark with Doe Anderson. And one of the stories I told was Colonel Beam's insisting that I stick to my knitting, and the knitting better have something to do with whiskey or I was going to screw it up. Mm-hmm. So I told the story of all of our family business failures, put it in an ad. Mom and Dad were down in Florida, probably visiting your parents.
Probably.
And Dad called me up and said, saw the ad. He said, son, your memory's pretty good, because this was like 40 years later. He said, but did you ever wonder why Colonel Beam knew so much about all of our business disasters during Prohibition? And I said, no. He said, well, the old bastard was a partner in all of them.
Oh, that's fantastic.
What about your mom? Your mom was integral in the brand. And wasn't she the first female to graduate from Louisville Speed School?
No, she didn't graduate from speed school. She got a chemistry degree in the arts and sciences.
Okay.
But I think she was the first female number one.
Okay.
And she was president of the chemistry club and all that kind of stuff. She was really smart. The main thing she did in college was get Dad through college. He didn't know it at the time, but he was dyslexic and had a horrible time reading. Mm-hmm. And she goosed him through, and he survived. And then after they got married, she started trying to goose her 3 children through, and immediately found out none of the 3 of us were nearly as academically qualified as she was, and she never did get over it.
But what did she have to do with the brand? Didn't she? Was it the wax?
She had everything to do with it, because she was politely, we'd say she's pushy.
Okay.
And when Dad wasn't either acting fast enough or acting smart enough, she would intervene. And the first area she intervened was the packaging. She didn't think he had enough sense to know how to do it, and she knew we didn't have enough money to go to New York and hire somebody. And she just happened to have the right hobbies. She was she practiced calligraphy. Mm-hmm. And so the Maker's Mark type style, she created that. That's now an internationally registered.
She drew that by hand?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think anybody could probably tell you what that looks like. That's incredible.
That's amazing.
And she was a noted pewter collector.
Okay.
I mean, not just for the size of the collection, but the fact she had a huge variety of craftsmen and knew all about them.
Sure.
And so anybody that had a piece of pewter that the museums couldn't help her with, they'd refer to her. And so that's the Maker's Mark. The touch mark is for pewter, what the hallmark is for silver.
Oh, yeah.
And generically, it's the Maker's Mark. It's the mark of the person that's really proud of what they do.
Sure.
And that's what Dad was committed to, was not making a commodity product like we had for our previous 4 generations.
Okay.
And off he went. She just observed, and then when she got to work on the bottle, she put it all together, plus the chemistry degree. Working with wax is not that easy. There's a lot of properties that have to be dealt with,
sure,
from heat, from cold, from translucency to stickiness to adhesiveness, and just on and on and on. And the chemistry degree, she was able to figure it out. And
so that was all her?
100%. And the most interesting part for me that I remember was, I was in high school at this time, because, he started in 53 and it really came on the market in 58, 59, is none of the glass companies would make the bottle the way she wanted it. She wanted this little pinch right at the bottom of the neck, and they wouldn't do it because it would cause the neck to tilt. And Dad said, well, we're just going to have to do what the glass companies want,
right?
Because they're in charge. She says, no, let's don't give up yet. Let's invite the chairman of Owens, Illinois down for Derby and have him stay at the house. He did, and she worked on him for 3 days, and he finally agreed to do exactly what she wanted, and all they had to do was to slow the lines down so that the molten glass would set up faster.
They didn't want to slow down. They wanted to keep it going.
And finally, somebody asked, why is that so important to you? And she said, if you pour Maker's Mark, you get a gurgle. And that's the reason.
That is genius.
No, hard-headed.
Well, listen, that's genius, because that's marketing 101.
Right.
I mean, unbelievable.
That's
well,
great.
She knew what she wanted, and she didn't move around on it much. Dad didn't either. He just did it more gracefully.
Okay.
So shifting gears a little bit here. The Maker's Mark Ambassador Program. It's really iconic, what you all done with that. How did the idea come about, and what impact has it had on the brand's growth?
Well, it came about because of the first, from 1958 until 1980, Maker's Mark was only in Kentucky. So our marketing plan was Dad would serve on 6 or 7 boards. I'd serve on 6 or 7 boards, and we'd make sure that they didn't cross-fertilize. And we would end up knowing damn near everybody that counted in the state. And so it was word of mouth. And then we would provide samples for the conventions. We'd go to the conventions, and that was the marketing plan. And then lo and behold, in 1980, the Wall Street Journal discovered us and did a front page story, which was the first time they had ever profiled a privately held company on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And it blew the roof off. Now, all of a sudden, we got customers outside Kentucky, and we don't know them.
Right.
What do you do? Well, it scared me to death because we didn't have an ad budget or anything like that. So we just decided, well, we want to talk to them, but they're going to have to tell us who they are first. And so we kind of shifted the responsibility, the marketing responsibility, to the customer to tell us who they are. And then we'll tell them all about everything. And this is right at the beginning of technology. So it was very difficult to be able to one-to-one. But the purpose of the Ambassador Program was to be able to talk to people who self-identified themselves and wanted to hear more about their favorite whiskey, but not as a group, as an individual. And it was the first of those kind of programs to do that. And it was also very specifically not a rewards program.
Right.
It had nothing to do with that. It's friends talking to friends about something they both care about.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that's incredible. And when did you start the Ambassador Program about?
It was right after the Wall Street Journal.
It was 80. Okay, around 80.
Yeah, 1980. Well, that took us a couple of years to figure it out because we didn't really know. I mean, there wasn't anything on the shelf that we could pick up. We had to create it.
Okay.
Or the smart technologists needed to create it. Because if we couldn't talk to people one-to-one, it wasn't going to accomplish our needs.
Okay. you talked about not having a marketing budget, and you mentioned Doe Anderson. I guess we got to remember Bob Allison.
Oh, wonderful man.
Wonderful guy.
Oh, wonderful agency. God, we've had them for 45 years.
Yes. So what was one or two of the craziest marketing schemes that you all came up with, or that you came up with, that, I don't know, went a direction that you weren't planning? Was it the new Coke, and Coke going back to, you did that ad with
I forgot about that one. That actually that was a courageous thing to do.
Yeah, you used their logo, right?
We did it deliberately.
Right.
This is when New Coke was out, and Roberto Guazita was the CEO in Atlanta, and everybody was beating him to death. And all he did was change the formula. Mm-hmm. And I go down to the agency and talk to Lindsay and Bob and all of them. I say, shit, that's what we did. And we changed the formula, and we're proud of it. So maybe we ought to defend these good folks. And so we ran a full-page ad in the Atlanta Constitution and the Wall Street Journal, making sure they saw it. The lawyers went berserk.
I bet.
And we complimented them. I mean, and we said, hey, we did this. It's working out pretty good.
Using their logo, that was the no-no, right?
Well, the bottle. We used
used the whole bottle. Okay.
Yeah, a full shot of the bottle.
Okay.
In a full-page ad in both those publications. And everybody said, you're going to die for this. Monday morning, I get a call from Mr. Guazita. He said it's the greatest ad he's ever seen in his life. He said, if I send a plane up, would you come down and have lunch with us? And I said, you bet. And I got to spend 3 hours with the CEO and Don Keogh, who was the chief operating officer. And while I was there, they brought the mail in, and on the cover of Business Week was Mr. Guazita's picture, and it was his copy of of that issue. Mm-hmm. I took it and I said, can I have this, and would you autograph it? He said, it's one of my prized possessions.
Do you still have it?
Yes, sir.
That's awesome.
Such great. Cool. What would be another marketing initiative that you did that you look back on and go, that was crazy?
Well, we did a lot of silliness, but because remember, nobody cared about bourbon, and therefore, talking about something people don't care about is
mm-hmm.
It doesn't.
You have to have a way to get their attention.
Yeah. Actually, I think the best thing and the craziest thing we did was the same, and it wasn't just us. It was a few other distilleries. We were all having the same problem. Nobody cared about what we did. Now, we were much farther down the road, and we worked with the other distilleries. And we decided together, there were, I think, 4 of us, that the best thing we could do was to disrupt the wine industry, because that's what was really hot. And they were having these big wine shows in all the major markets in the country and eventually in the world. And the top vintners would come, and it was really a big deal. So we persuaded the one in New York to allow 4 of us bourbon distillers to come in. And then we did a really good job of upstaging all the vintners, and that was the beginning of the end of the wine.
Oh wow!
And before long, they became bourbon shows.
Gotcha.
Now, it wasn't just a few years, but that disruption did more than any because we all realized that we could be down there in Kentucky competing like hell. We wouldn't get anything done. Together, we could make more pie if we were smart enough to defray competing with each other, and let's compete against who's really stealing share of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And it was the California vintners.
Huh. Very interesting.
Speaking of that competition, was there ever another bourbon company that did something you guys were envious of, or you guys were like, we should have thought about that, or something that you felt like was kind of trend setting?
I think it happens every day.
Every day?
Yeah, the best thing that's happened with the bourbon boom is we've got all these smart young people in. Mm-hmm. And the way I look at it, it's competition. I'm retired now. It's not my problem. It's Rob's problem, my son.
Sure.
So I say, that's good for Kentucky. That's good for the industry, because we're in the beginning of a slowdown now, which had to happen. It happens every time. And now we've got some of the smartest people in the industry in the bourbon sector. Mm-hmm. And if I've got to fight through a downtime as an industry, I want the smart people on my side, not over here selling beer or wine or whatever.
Amen.
So I think we're really well positioned and we do have a monopoly on bourbon in Kentucky, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're really well positioned because we've got all the smart guys with all the smart ideas, and they're all coming from here. They're not all coming from Maker's Mark, but they are coming from Kentucky bourbon distillers.
Awesome.
Well, you also disrupted some things within your own brand with Maker's 46, right? Yeah, because it was a milestone for you guys. And what did that mean to you when you did that?
Well, it was we didn't touch it forever because Mom and Dad were the creators, and they really they laid the foundations for me to be able to do what I did. Okay, which was commercialize their idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I'm about ready to retire. My son's in it, and he's obviously really good. So I'm watching him, and I'm noticing that he's talking about the product his grandmother and his grandfather created and what wonderful stewards they were, this, that, and the other. And he never mentioned me. So I'm thinking, shit, when I retire, it's going to be like he came right after them.
Mm-hmm.
He'll take my name off the side of the label, my signature, and that'll be the end of me. It was just kind of a joke I was having with our master distiller. And he said, our master distiller said, well, have you ever thought about if you shut your eyes and everybody left the room for a week and you had to come back and say, is there anything you might do to make this more suitable for your profile? And I said, hell, I never thought about it because I don't know how you could improve on perfection.
Right.
Well, that wasn't the question. The question's personal, and everybody's taste is
a little bit different, sure.
Yeah, and Mom and Dad weren't shooting for perfection. They were shooting for what they enjoyed, and they didn't like bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And there was only so much they could do and still call it Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
Right.
So I got with our master distiller, and we spent 6 months. And this, by the way, I don't give advice, but this might be the smartest thing we ever did. We weren't trying to solve a problem. We were trying to make sure we were asking the right question.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I've ever done something semi-smart, it's because I've spent 90% of the time walking around the question, making sure that we're asking it properly. And so we did. We spent 6 months. We came up with 7 words that defined if we could create it, it would be, for me, it would be yummy.
Mm-hmm.
And we started down that road with some great help from Independent Stave, which is the cooperage company that happens to have the world's largest cooperage factory in the world, 9 miles down the road. And they worked with us. They do a lot of work in the wine industry, so they worked with French oak, and they worked with different ways to cook woods to create different flavors. They had a couple of PhDs on staff. And we dug right into the project, all to create extra yummy.
Mm-hmm.
And at least that was a word everybody understood. The marketers understood it, salespeople understood it, I understood it, because I'm not a whiskey guy. Mom and Dad were the whiskey people. I was the commercial guy. And we got there, and it was really something. We didn't anticipate everything because we didn't know that the finishing using French oak had to be done in a cellar where it was really cool. And we didn't have a cellar. There's no cellars at distilleries. And so we had to build one. And that took a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I was
there's a lot of rock.
And a lot of rock. And we had a Chihuly exhibit up next door, and we were afraid to blow the rock. We might drop $1 million art piece down on the floor. So there was obstacles.
Just a few.
Man, that's fascinating.
That's awesome.
So, listen, bourbon and tourism is exploding this day and age. In Kentucky, Louisville has become a major tourism destination. Has this ever been a vision of yours?
Well, not this big. Our vision for hospitality, Mom was the hospitality chieftain in the family and really in Bardstown. And when Dad started this thing out, he warned her that we were going to host people at the distillery, and that's the way she was going to help build a customer base. And of course, the place was run down, and he didn't have much money, and he forced her to spend money on landscaping and things just to make it so we wouldn't embarrass ourselves when people came over. And then one day he announced that, or she announced to him that we were going to have a visitor program. It wasn't just going to be her bringing people over. And that my sister Leslie, who had just been terminated at American Airlines in Louisville as the ground hostess, was going to be the director of our little hospitality program. And so that meant we had to fix up a couple of buildings so she could operate. And this was 3 years after I started. We had never had one visitor at the distillery, other than ones we brought over.
Okay.
Nobody walked in, zero. And so Leslie's there a couple of years, and she could talk your arm off. And she had people coming. I mean, it wasn't gigantic, but it was, it was 100 or 2 a week. And so we get the idea that maybe we could, if we get together, the distilleries in Bardstown, and promote a circuit.
Once again, work together,
and we went to the restaurants, and we did placemats with each distillery. It was Heaven Hill and Jim Beam and Barton, which had the museum at the time, now 1792. And they all said, "Heck yes, let's don't do it for us. Let's do it for Bardstown. We can put butts in beds."
Sure.
And it helps the community. The Stephen Foster story was already a big draw. We did notice that the people coming to the distillery drove fancier cars than the people that came to the Stephen Foster story. So we said, this might actually help a lot if we could get this going for you. And so we did, and it worked pretty good. And then other distilleries not in Bardstown wanted to be involved. And we couldn't handle it. We didn't really have any staff or anything. Everybody, it was just volunteers.
Sure.
And so we turned it over to the Kentucky Distillers Association. Ed O'Daniel, who's a longtime state senator in Kentucky, was at that time head of the Kentucky Distillers Association. And everybody jumped in. And in the last 15, 20 years, it's become a monster. But it's worked because we all work together, enjoy working together. And every distillery took it seriously. Everybody did absolutely everything they could do to make their experience the best.
Did you ever envision it being as big as it is now?
Oh, of course not. Well, and I tell you, another person that had a lot to do with this success was Mayor Fisher. I mean, he is directly responsible for the Main Street project, but he got great responses. I mean, have you ever seen an industry work together to say, okay, I'll take this end of the street, you take this end of the street?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And it's fabulous. It has now started to bring, not just started, but to bring really good restaurants down on Main Street.
That's right.
That are keepers. Because remember, people on the Bourbon Trail drive nice cars.
That's right. That's right.
And what Owsley Brown had to play a big part of this too.
Always.
He was. I mean, what a great guy.
The main thing Owsley did, he does a lot. He was my hero for a lot of reasons. But
for those of you that don't know, Owsley Brown, that's Brown Foreman.
Ah, okay.
That's just for our audience.
Okay, I forgot about him. They didn't know him the way, but I could write a book on Owsley. He was one of the best people to ever live.
Yes.
But what he did was, he decided that back in early 90s, when Makers was starting to take off slowly, that they could compete in that arena, and bought back the old Early Times distillery, which they had once owned and shut down, and they could go back and restore it. Everybody advised them not to do it. It was too much money. It was a crazy site. It flooded. It had everything wrong with it. He said, we're going to do it. And they did it. And it was the Woodford Reserve facility. It's been a godsend. They were one of the companies that came with us when we invaded the space of the wine people. Yeah.
A good bunch to have along.
Yeah.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah.
It was. I think back on that almost more than anything. How much fun it was working with Jimmy Russell at Wild Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Booker Noe at Beam, and Lincoln Henderson at Woodford, and Brown Foreman. Best people that ever lived.
Jim, Charlie, question for you guys. What's the connection here with Dahlem?
Well, goes
way back.
Way back. We used to own the 1000 building at the corner of Breckenridge and Dutchman's Lane.
You might want to go further back than that.
Well, yeah, you got to go further back than that.
Oh, a lot farther
Well,
back.
Sorry.
I'll let you.
He was there.
Yeah, he was there. So my parents got to know you. I guess they knew your father, right?
And Mom.
And Mom, our parents. And so they got to know you, and you all became best friends.
It was before that. Dad and your grandparents were. My father and your grandparents were.
Okay, and the grandparents. Okay. And so we've known each other for forever then. And I guess one day, you tell the story. You needed to get a boat moved, right?
A large boat, and I had never had anything bigger than a dinghy, and I had to move it up to Craig's Creek, which is one dam up. I had to go through the locks.
Okay.
Scared to death. Called your dad. I was trying to get him to do it. And he said, I think all my boys can do this. They've been doing this forever.
We were 14 at the time.
Well, see, I didn't know that. And they got on the boat. I'm nervous as hell. And we headed upriver, and I got comfortable real fast.
We've been around boats for all of our lives, and so we've been doing this stuff, and so it was.
So you put him at ease pretty quick.
Yeah, real fast.
we get boats in and out, slips and everything pretty easily, and knew how to tie boats to do the proper knots.
And
everything.
knew how to
Thanks my
deal
dad.
with the lockmaster when commercial stuff's trying to come through.
That's true. Yeah, you got the barges in there with you. That's fun.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating when they're over the top of you, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
And I never lost respect from them. That to me was over the top.
That's pretty cool.
We and the Maker's Mark was in our office building for 30 plus years.
Yeah. Okay.
As a tenant, there were several different spaces in the building, and when in our situation, we were in that building as well, and we got to know all of our tenants and got to know them all very, very well, and all of their employees very, very well, and it was just a great family. It was a great family that we had in that office building. We all had a lot of fun together.
Yeah, we did.
And then we all had to move out because we sold the building. And Mr. Samuels, Rob at the time, I guess, he said, "You need to go find us some space."
Okay.
So I went to go find them some space, and I think it was Mitch Wagner, the CFO, and Valerie, who's marketing, and I went and found some space and showed it to them, and they figured it out and said yes. And I think the first time you saw the space, and you and Rob saw the space, was the day you moved in. I don't think you.
Well,
you knew about where it was.
I was concerned because I was retired, and I wanted to have a wee little office out of the way, and you were nice enough to get me one.
We knew that was a requirement. So.
Okay.
Knew that going in. That's pretty awesome. All right, so there's a ton of boutique bourbons these days. It seems like they're popping up all over the place. How's that impacting the industry? And are you seeing problems going forward with too much supply and too many brands?
Well, I remember I'm retired, so I don't get quite as much data on all this
Fair enough.
as I should. I do try to keep up on it without invading working people's airspace. The answer is it's good and bad. The good part is the really smart ones, the ones that are differentiating and making an impact, fortunately, are heavy up in Kentucky.
Yep.
Okay, we've got about 100 distilleries here. There's like 2,500 outside of Kentucky. Big impact's going to be on the 2,500 because there is an oversupply of facilities and an oversupply of brands and inventory right now.
Okay.
How much? I don't know. It really depends on Trump to some extent because bourbon has been growing rapidly overseas. Last time he came in, he put the tariffs on in Europe, and they shut us down.
Got it.
And if that happens this time, it's a much bigger shutdown I mean, just those 4 years and we finally got them off only about a year ago. So that's concern. And you've got the relations with China and India, huge potential markets.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows exactly what to do there. We could be really short of whiskey in 3 or 4 years, and I say we, I mean all of us, or we could be way long.
Is whiskey not prevalent in China and India right now?
Not ours, not bourbon.
Okay.
And remember, most of these companies are owned by international companies, so they're really sophisticated about international trade.
Sure.
And so that's not the problem. It's the non-tariff trade barriers.
Got it.
It's all the things that everybody does to America because we're such horrible negotiators.
Right.
Yeah. And so I'm going to back up just a little bit. Explain to the listeners, because we have people who listen to this podcast all over the place, what the difference between the classification of bourbon. What makes it the classification of bourbon versus just whiskey?
Okay. Everybody thinks bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. The only people that really matter are the customers. Customers think it has to be made in Kentucky.
That's a good thing.
And that's why we got a monopoly. Unlike champagne and cognac that have appellations in their native, our only appellation is it has to be made in the United States. And it's a trading agreement with all of our trading partners. And it is the one that's enforced, by the way. But still, there's big difference when you're outside the limestone shelf, which is 90% in Kentucky. You can't make the same.
So it's the water, right? It's the water that you can get from Kentucky that really gives it the taste it has.
It's the water, and it's the care for ingredients. If you think about, you go buy grain from a elevator, you don't know where it came from. At our place, it all comes from within 40 miles. We've got all of our 25 farmers storing it in bins that are designated just for us. And they all use regenerative farming practices, no tilling, no chemicals. Okay, so we think of our bourbon as an agricultural product and have controlled. We control the water source. I don't know that there's another distillery that only uses their own water, and we're not a really small distillery anymore. So when I say, well, what did I contribute? Well, the main thing I contributed was not getting lazy and screwing up all the things that mattered to my father, most of which had to do with ingredients.
Got it.
And it has to be at least 50%. The first grain, the major grain, has to
corn.
be corn.
Yeah, 51%.
51% of it, and then otherwise, if it's not, then it's whiskey.
Well, it's a little more. It's kind of like think about whiskey as automobiles, and then bourbon as Ford. There's a lot of whiskeys. There's Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, and the American whiskeys. I always think about the American whiskeys in 4 categories. Is blended whiskeys, which is pretty much dead. Those are for the old people. Calvert, Seagram 7, all of those is gone. Rye whiskey is very much an American product. It started in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Those are the 2 states associated. Jack Daniel's has done a marvelous job creating a category for one brand. And it's a distinctive product and process. And then Kentucky bourbon is what it is, mainly because of the water and the grain sourcing.
Okay.
Your all's distillery and how it's evolved over the years. I think the first time I went down there, I was about 15 years old when you were doing the brunch, Derby brunch.
The Derby brunch.
The Derby brunch.
Oh, my God.
Mom and Dad brought us down there. And
you were always dressed as something.
Yeah, you always had an outfit on. And then 15 years old, my mom goes, okay, don't tell your dad I told you this, but you need to try mint julep. Just one. Only one. And she said, only one, but don't tell your dad. Just you all go do that because they're good.
I'll take your dad over here.
Because they're really good. So, yep, those were some good years. Those parties that y'all had down there were blessed. They were small. They were really small, and it was fun getting everybody together on Oaks Day, and then everybody heading up to the track.
Yeah. Rob doesn't do it anymore. I think it's gotten too expensive to go to the track.
Probably. Probably.
No doubt about that.
The distillery is amazing. And if you haven't been there, you should go. If anybody out there is coming to Kentucky, you've got to see this distillery. I mean, it is so special, and it is such a gem on the tour. Sure, you want to go see some of the others, but
it's worth the trip.
You don't want to miss Maker's Mark.
Well,
it's special.
If you want to go to the one that it's on a working farm, and we've got a world-class restaurant, and we have animals, we have vegetable gardens, we have mushroom gardens. We grew 1,400 pounds of honey last year. We've got 5 apiaries, and so it's all on property. We've got Wagyu cattle and 400 head of lamb. Lamb chops pretty good, and and also I don't know if you have any Kentuckians listening to this, but Kentucky is the home of the black truffle, and we have a truffle dog that actually finds them.
How about
Wow,
that?
I did not know
And
that.
they love that in the restaurant, you know. So
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a good restaurant.
There's a lot going on that's got to do with taste. You know, back in my day, it was a whiskey. Rob does a lot of experimenting with our whiskeys and the cellar. The cellar has become a really important way to age whiskey without having it get older on the acidic side, to keep additional tannic acids out. And that's the cellar aged special rendition we have. It's pretty expensive, but if you sip on it, you can really enjoy it. It's absolutely amazing. And that was all because of 46. We had to build a cellar. Now we got a cellar. What can we use it for other than what it was intended to be used for?
And that room that you've got in there is really, really cool.
That's special, isn't it?
What he's talking about out there is they've got this big glass wall, and you can look in, and people can build their own profiles using staves and kind of do their own barrel or barrels or whatever they want to do. And there's people coming from all over the place to do this.
We've always liked hospitality that was interactive. And it means you get a deeper experience, and we like that. Our people like it, because they're not just lecturing somebody all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And we got farm tours now, and I think 8 or 9 different varieties of tours, all of which have a hands-on component.
Cool.
This question for you. You know, from your leadership at Maker's Mark, what would be your most valuable lessons, if you will, in leadership for aspiring entrepreneurs?
Well, for me now, and at least on the operating profile side, I would qualify as an entrepreneur, even though Dad was the entrepreneur of Maker's Mark. I found the most valuable was when we slowed down in creating 46 to make sure we were asking the right questions, to get the North Star defined before we started running and throwing crap against the walls and things. That was huge. And it was like a light bulb went on. I said, why haven't we been doing this ago? And I think the other thing is, and people naturally have this or they don't, is just tenacity. Anybody that's going to go out and risk everything has got to be tenacious. They almost always are. And of course, risk tolerance is just huge. And every once in a while, you gotta blow through bad ideas. And that's going to offend some people.
Right.
And I've done a little bit of that.
Yeah, you're gonna make mistakes sometimes too, and you gotta have push
You
through
have a sense
those.
of humor
And-
about all
yeah.
that. All of it. I'd say the great majority of people that are going to start companies have already got that built in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just doing it.
Yeah, you're talking about the question. I remember my dad telling me when I was getting out of college, he said, this is where it starts to get harder because for all of your life you've been in school and you have been asked the question and then you have to answer the question.
Defined.
As it's defined in that question. And you have to, then you turn the paper in and boom, you're scored on that.
And you're exactly right.
And he said, now you have to figure out what the question is.
The right question.
And you damn well better hope you get the right question.
Yeah.
Because then in order to get to the answer.
Got to solve it.
He said, so you have to make sure you have the right question. So I hear you completely on that.
Well, and that's important because that's a matter of unlearning before you can relearn.
Mm-hmm.
because that process of focusing on the question is not intuitive.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, sir, you've chaired over 25 nonprofits and received numerous honors for your contributions for the community. What drives your passion for just community involvement?
Well, first off, I was forced into it.
Well, because I heard you talking, so you did a lot of these boards to meet people, right? That way you guys were expanding the brand from a marketing aspect.
Okay, that was Dad.
Okay.
And me, but that was the yap part of it. When I got out of school, he said, okay, here's your job, go find customers. And number 2, your job is to get involved in the community.
Got it.
And it has 2 parts. It has payback part, and it's trying to get you ready to run the company. And that part was, I want you to pick 2 organizations that you'd like to be on the board. I'll see if I can make it happen. And then within 5 years, your job is to be asked to chair that board. Mm. So that was the hard part. Or that was you're not going to sit in a room. You're going to jump in the middle of it from day one. That was the best thing that happened to me right there when he said, you will be asked to chair this board, or this will be a failure.
Interesting. I don't know that I've ever heard that before.
Well, think about it. For me, it was wonderful. And then it got to be fun. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm around some really smart people and I'm learning business. Hell, I'm an engineer and a lawyer.
Yeah,
I don't know anything
about
about
point.
business.
You know, guys, when he says that, I think of Vince. I think Charlie. I think of you. I think of people that have gotten involved in these nonprofits, and all of a sudden they're chairing the board.
Right.
It's a lot of truth to that. You're learning business doing that.
Oh yeah, from really smart people.
Yeah, that's cool.
It really is.
I don't want to pick out anyone, but I probably learned more from Russ Cox than anybody.
Okay,
the head of Norton Hospital here. We've served on a number of boards together. I hang on every word.
We talk about Russ driving over here. Yeah. Great guy.
So you've been unbelievably generous with your time. And then last one for me, and Charlie and Jim may have another one here, but obviously you're a great storyteller. I mean, just listen to you talk. I think we could probably do this for hours. Can you share one of your favorite anecdotes about Maker's Mark or the bourbon industry?
The thing I'm proudest of, and it's not proud of me, but proud of us, is that we get along so well. It has made everything that's happened to bourbon and Kentucky bourbon. And we all went in with one mission, and that is keep Kentucky bourbon one word.
And when you say all gets along, you mean all the different bourbon companies?
In Kentucky only.
Yeah, got it.
We don't, no, the other ones we compete against.
Right.
No, here we want a monopoly. And guess who else that helps? That helps all the taxpayers in the state.
Heck yeah.
I remember when the Maker's Mark restaurant was open down on 4th Street Live, and you insisted everybody's bourbon.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Be on the shelf. It wasn't just Maker's, but you said the only way we're doing this is if everybody's bourbon's in there. That's how we're going to do it.
Well, it's been a recurring theme in this podcast. I've heard a few things, but, trying to ask the right questions is a big takeaway for me. But also the fact that involving these other bourbon companies to be involved, it seems like that was a big reason of the bourbon boom. It's pretty cool.
It was it was also, and I don't talk about this at all, but when I went down to visit Coke, and how competitive they are with Pepsi, and how different that is from the way we go about it. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, I kept my mouth shut, but I did try to ask a few questions of their 2 chief officers.
Right.
Why they did that. And they hate them. I mean, they hate Pepsi.
Yeah.
I don't hate any of our guys
that
we compete against.
Yeah.
And they win doing it their way.
Sure.
And at least so far, we have all won doing it our way.
I think I remember the story. I was alive. You could see Heaven Hill glowing from Louisville when they had that big burn.
It was terrible.
It was awful.
Huge fire.
And anyway, you all were all there for everybody, right?
Everybody
jumped in and said, "What do we need to do?"
I was in Yugoslavia when it happened, and saw it on CNN at like 2 a.m. our time in Yugoslavia. And I called. I was the last distiller to call. Every other distiller had called. We'll bottle. We'll do this. We'll do that. We ended up lending them our engineer, who had expertise in working with insurance companies.
Yeah.
But everybody was there, and Max was extremely gracious about it all. Max Shapiro.
Max is a great guy.
Yeah,
great guy.
And for people who are out there, what happened was what year was that? What happened? Do you remember? It was a massive fire that happened.
It was election night. That's what I remember.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember that.
It was a massive fire, and it spread because it was one rick house, which is what houses the bourbon barrels. One rick house caught on fire. The bourbon barrels would explode, and you'd have a river of fire going to the next rick house, catching that one on fire, and then the next thing you know, the streams are all on fire. I mean, it was apocalyptic.
And the stream that he's talking about encircles Bardstown. So I don't know how many miles of that creek was on fire. If it hadn't have been raining intensely, Bardstown, parts of Bardstown wouldn't exist today.
Right.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was
Incredible.
It was unbelievable. Like I said, you could see it glowing from Louisville.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh my gosh.
Jim, Charlie, anything else before we let him get out of here today?
I think we
appreciate you being here, Mr. Samuels.
Yeah, we would
very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your friendship.
But nobody listens to me anymore, so this is good.
Well, I have a feeling quite a few people may listen to this podcast. So, and you said you haven't listened to one of these yet. Maybe we can get this. Can be your first one.
I haven't. That's true. That's what happens when you're old and a non-techie.
We'll see if we can't get you to listen to your first podcast here, the one that you're on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up this episode of the Dahlem Realty Podcast. Another huge thank you to Bill Samuels Jr. for sharing his wisdom, stories, and incredible insights with us. It's been a major honor to learn from one of the greats in the bourbon industry. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your favorite shows. That way, you'll never miss an episode and all these great stories and insights. Once again, thank you for listening.